Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's really nice to see some familiar faces and new faces as well. I'm just gonna ask you to please stay muted for as long as the presentation is taking place. We have a section where you'll be able to speak. You'll have 2 minutes to use the mic. You can ask questions, comment if you want as well. But yeah, we have around 200 people register, I think a little bit more. So we're expecting a lot of people. So again, if you want to add any comment, please use the chat. Normally, this should be at the bottom of your screen. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen real quick. But in the meantime, just to remind you that please, um, stay muted and you'll have some time to speak at some point during the presentation. I'm just gonna maybe wait a couple of minutes. I know more people are joining right now. We have around 100 people. We have around 80 people in the meeting right now, but again, we're expecting more. So maybe in the time being, why don't you go on the chat? I think you'll see that at the bottom of your screen, and you can like introduce yourself. You can say your name, where you're joining us from tonight, just so your neighbors know that you are here. So feel free to do that if you want. But again, we'll start this meeting in a couple of minutes. So thank you so much for joining us. I guess while we wait for more people to join, I can just go ahead and tell you a little bit about Zoom. If you haven't used Zoom before, I'm glad to see people are using the chat to say hi and letting us know where they're coming from or visiting us or where they're located. So just a couple of reminders for Zoom. Again, if you just joined this meeting, please make sure that you stay muted. Um, you can, whenever the chance comes, you'll be able to use the raise hand option. This is going to be normally at the bottom of your screen if you're on a desktop. This could change if you're using a any sort of a device like a telephone, like a tablet. But normally you'll be able to see that raise hand option. Sometimes it's under other emojis maybe. And please use the chat if you want to ask questions, and then we'll do kind of like a switch back and forth between raise hands and the chat to like answer your questions. We have a closed caption option available, so if you want to activate that, you can do that as well. A couple more reminders: this meeting is being recorded. It's going to be available at the website after this meeting, and we have an interpreter. Jim is joining us tonight, so you might be able to see him right now, but if for some reason he disappears from your screen, you can scroll down on all the different participants and pin him so you can see him if you need him. So yeah, let's wait maybe one more minute and we'll start. Wow, I see more people joining us right now. We have around 140 people registered or being part of the meeting. We have around 200 people registered. It's really nice to see this many new names and faces. And I'm glad to see that people are using the chat to saying hi. So please keep doing that while we wait. Let me just go back. If you just joined this meeting, just a quick reminder that this is going to be recorded and shared in our website after the meeting. All right, we have around 140 participants. Yeah, this is a great turnout. And if you just join us, just a quick reminder that you'll have a chance to speak. We'll give you 2 minutes to use the mic to unmute yourself. In the meantime, I do ask you to please stay muted for the duration of the presentation. And if you don't want to use the mic, you might as well just use the chat option, and then we'll be switching back and forth, answering questions from people that raise their hand or people that ask questions in the chat. And if for some reason we cannot answer all your questions tonight, which I think might be the case since we have this many people, we will send you your answers via email once we send you the link to the survey and the video of the presentation. So, all right. I think we can go ahead and start. Oh, wait, give me one second. All right, I'm going to pass the mic to Director Karina Riggs.
Thank you, Ricardo. So thank you, everybody, for being here. I'm Karina Riggs. I'm the Director of the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure. Joining on this presentation today from my staff is Kim Lucas, Assistant Director for Policy and Planning, and Paige Anderson, who's a project engineer in our traffic division. We are proceeding on this project in partnership with Healthy Ride, and Ricardo is here from Healthy Ride as one of the partners on this project, and Bike Pittsburgh, who's been a critical partner in moving some of these. And so Eric Borer is here there. I want to give just a brief second or an opportunity, unscripted, if Councilperson Strasburger, who I see is also here, if you want to share any words, or we can jump into it.
Thank you, Director. I really just want to welcome everyone. I'm very impressed with the turnout today. Clearly, residents of Shadyside and nearby residents care deeply about this project and have strong opinions. And I also really want to thank all of the members of the advisory committee. This time around, we created an advisory committee that included residents, representatives of institutions along the corridor, representatives of the business community, the ADA community, it's been a really wonderful process to see people from outside of government working with the Move Forward PGH team to really craft a number of different options here that everyone will have the opportunity to see and to view online at the project site as well. So welcome, thank you for being here, and thanks to everyone for your participation.
Great, thank you, Councilperson. The list is too long, and these virtual formats are always a little bit difficult to juggle. I don't believe I saw any other members of City Council. I'm going to give a brief moment of silence if any of them want to also speak. Okay, great. Then, Ricardo, why don't we go to the next slide?
Sure. And right before I do that, just a quick reminder that we have closed captions. I see that somebody asked that in the chat. You might need to activate on your own device. And also we have Jim, who is an ASL interpreter today. So, you can also pin him if you need that.
Yeah, thank you, Ricardo, for that. If you if you scroll through the names, there is a interpreter that is listed there. You may need to pin, if you wave over his image, there's 3 small dots that you can click, and it will give you the opportunity to pin his image to keep him present for you to assist with communication. So we're going to try and move fairly swiftly. Jim, it says your lighting makes it hard to see your hands. I don't know if there's anything you can do about that. I'll pause for a minute while he adjusts. Better. Okay. Thank you. Okay. We're going to try and move relatively swiftly. There is a lot of information to cover in this time. We're going to try and move swiftly through the presentation so that we can keep as much time as possible for dialogue and discussion and feedback at the end. Just a little bit of a heads up that there's a lot of dense information that we're going to go through. So welcome. This has been a topic of conversation for some years. We're hopeful that we really have done some good thinking on this, really heard with the advisory committee, the insights that they've provided, and hope that we can work with you to find some good strategies to go forward. Ricardo, the next slide, please. Just a little bit of a level setting and context for this. If you go forward again, Ricardo. We, back in November of 2016, City Council, so this is 4.5 years ago, City Council passed a pretty visionary complete street policy for the city. And what this policy said, among other things, is that we need to accommodate all people who move on our city streets, regardless, irrespective of the mode of travel that they choose to use, that they choose to do, or for many in our community that they must use. So we have about 20% of the households in our city who do not have access at all to a private automobile. They are dependent on alternative modes of travel. So we need to, large or small, whatever that number is, we need to make sure that there is a place for these people in the overall network of our city. So it doesn't mean on each and every street, although each and every street, they should not have to risk life and limb to travel on, but on a subset of streets that we're actually providing for each mode of travel. And so last year we completed the Bike Plus plan, which is our citywide plan for bicycles. If you go to the next slide. And one of the places, one of the ways that, why is this important? One of the things that we hear often is, well, there's just not that many people who bicycle in Pittsburgh. And we're not necessarily just building these facilities for those that are biking today, because we know that the majority of people in our city may not bike regularly today, but they might be interested in being able to use these kind of facilities at some point in the future. More often than not, what we hear from people is, you know, I might, but it's too scary. The streets are too dangerous. I would never ride alongside traffic. It's just too intimidating. We hear often people who grew up in the city saying, well, I used to bike when I was a kid, but I would never do it today, or I wouldn't let my kids do it. And so it's really trying to create that safe environment, those safe all ages, all of these connections that would allow people, not just those who regularly bike, who are those somewhat confident or very confident cyclists who really, you know, you see around the city routinely. They are important constituents, and they're the ones that we also want to, I hope you can hear me. There's a comment that, can I speak up? Hopefully you can hear me okay. But they are one subset of people, but it's really this larger group of the people who are the more novice bicyclists. They might be recreational riders, they might be young people, they might be older adults. They're people that generally feel vulnerable or at risk or under stress when they bicycle, and therefore they don't. And so it's really that group. So as you think about these alternatives, that's what we want you to think about, is how do we bring people that are sort of in the shadows, if you will, of bicycling out into, so that they can use the network as well. We also know that there's a good third, or more than a third, of the residents of our city who are not ever going to bike. They don't want to bike, they're not interested in biking. This is not something that they're going to do. But there's benefits to creating safe, comfortable facilities for those residents also, for those stakeholders as well, because what we also know is that motorists feel traffic stress on our streets as well. Transit riders, pedestrians feel stress on our roads as well, because there's a lot of conflict, there's a lot of chaos when there's not really clear routes for people to travel on. And so we're really trying to satisfy all these different users. Next slide. So Move Forward Pittsburgh, which is the initiative that we are bringing forward a number of different bike facilities into the city on. As I mentioned at the beginning, is a partnership between the city of Pittsburgh, Healthy Ride, who is our shared bike provider, and Bike Pittsburgh, who's been working on these issues in the city for a long time. It pursues multi-dimensions. Education, so really making sure everyone knows where our facilities are, how to safely travel on the facilities in the city, and just encouraging compliance with the traffic rules for all users. Engineering, which is the design, and then ultimately encouragement. It's fitting that this week is Earth Week, Earth Day, really looking at trying to pursue opportunities for those lower emission, lower cost modes of travel in the city. Go ahead, Ricardo. We've been engaging with a number of different neighborhoods, including this corridor and this community, through a number of different formats. There's been flyers you've seen posted, there's been online engagement, there's been in-person engagement, such as the light giveaway earlier this week. There's 2 different websites that you can look to, the Engage Pittsburgh website, as well as the Move Forward PGH. So really trying to, we understand that this is an unusual circumstance of doing this during the pandemic, really going through multimodal means of communication to reach as many people as we can. Go ahead. Oh, it looks like we missed one slide, which is, as the council person mentioned, we have had an advisory committee for this process, which have been really tremendously valuable. And I want to call out, and if you feel like identifying yourself in the chat, please do. The advisory committee has been a very diverse group that really spans that spectrum of the typology that was on the other slide, ranging from people who really, are not necessarily pushing hard for bicycle facilities, but have other concerns that they want to make sure are addressed, all the way, to just the livable neighborhood residents who really want to push for higher quality community, to those that are more advocates. And so want to really thank the vitally important, and that group has met, I believe, 8 times, really going through, having tough discussions, being very, very thoughtful in this process. I want to thank those participants for what they've contributed to get us to this point, to share this information with you now. And what you'll see is kind of everything in a more succinct format that they've seen, and then we'll make sure that the other, the whole breadth of information is posted on the website. Overall, just the general project development process, sort of, we go through a planning exercise, which is the phase that we're in right now, through to design, then to construction, and then, projects never really finish. We always continuously evaluate, redesign, tweak, address, and make them, ever better, we hope, through that. So if you click one more forward, Ricardo, where we are in this process right now is early on in this process, relatively, where we're defining the objectives and the concerns and sort of the non-starters that we need to address to provide a safe bicycle corridor. Here, looking at the different alternatives that we have to get there. And then, hopefully we'd like to leave this meeting with some notion of what a preferred concept, at least directionally, what is the direction that we want to go to. I do want to emphasize that we are intent on providing for a safe facility for all users in this area of the city. So not really going to, we're not really throwing open the door of should we accommodate safe bicycling. We must accommodate safe bicycling, at least somewhere in this general network that we have. So, among the different alternatives, among the different iterations of alternatives that are here, let's really work together collaboratively in this meeting to find a way that we can do that. Nobody wants to kill another human being. Nobody wants to be involved in a tragic crash. We need to do this for our community. So that's keeping that in mind. Go ahead. So I think this is where we really mention the stakeholder and advisory groups, as I mentioned, that have been a part of this. They've met multiple times, really, really diverse group. So just want to thank the Shadyside Action Coalition, the Chamber of Commerce, the Complete Streets groups, faith institutions that have been a part of this, educational institutions, Age Friendly Pittsburgh, others that have been invited to participate in this effort, really spanning the spectrum of interests here. In the Shadyside community. Go ahead. So we're going to talk about some of these alternatives. I keep warning you, it's dense information. We'll answer all of the questions at the end. Ricardo, if you have to interrupt me because I can't track the comments to clarify anything, please feel free to do that. But we'll try and get them all out again so then we can have a conversation together about the strengths and relative weaknesses of these different alternatives. I will say ahead of time, and you will know them as soon as you see them, there are some alternatives that we put out here to let you know that they were evaluated. They are not, they will become immediately evident that they're not necessarily viable alternatives, but we want you to be able to see them. Go ahead. So this is just sort of looking at what are we working with here. So we have a number of, a handful of disconnected bicycle facilities that service this area right now. So they pick up and they drop off and they don't quite get you to some of those many destinations that are here in the neighborhood, whether it's Bakery Square and the large employment center that is happening there and in East Liberty, or to Oakland and to all of the activity centers that are there and the many, many different retail, institutional, faith destinations that are in between. So what we're looking at, this is just a snapshot from the Bike Plus plan that was designed. The blue and the green are the established bicycle facilities that are already in place. The purple are connections that are generally that we have a notion of how we can make those connections. The blue lines are what we're here to figure out. We don't know. There's no easy answer to providing that connection, but there is a strong demand trend that needs to be met, and that's what we're working on with you, is to solve that that very difficult puzzle piece. Go ahead. Next slide. Ellsworth Avenue, this as a corridor just because it is the principal street through this area. And so Ellsworth sadly has a bit of a history of crashes on this corridor. You know this better than I. So over just a 4 or 5 year period, this short segment, relatively short segment of Ellsworth has experienced 63 crashes. 27 of the motor vehicle crashes resulted in injury, which is a fairly high rate. So over 1/3, almost 1/2 of the crashes have resulted in injury. There's been 8 pedestrian crashes that have resulted in an injury. Again, fairly high for this type of street in this context, and 5 crashes that have resulted in injury to people traveling on bicycle. I will note that there's a long lag time in the crashes that get reported to the state data center. So the most recent data that we have is from 2019, so about a year and a half ago. We know that there's been at least one severe bicycle crash in that time that is not reflected on this data. What this data does not report, and with bicycles in particular, there's an interesting thing, is that what goes into the state data center are only those crashes that either result in injuries that require medical care or injuries that require the vehicle to be towed. Generally, bicycles are not towed. So crashes that result in a disabled bicycle but do not result in a person needing to be transported to medical care will not be reported in this data set. Oftentimes, pedestrians and people on bicycles who experience crashes are so filled with adrenaline at the moment of the crash that they also do not seek medical care at that moment that the police are responding, but they often do then require medical care later for concussions and for other injuries. So it's just a caveat on the data that you're seeing here that it misses a lot. It does not report near misses, which we also know to be quite common in our city. So the long and the short of it is, even with the somewhat limited data sets that we have available to us, there is a safety concern that needs to be addressed on this corridor, either on Ellsworth itself or on a parallel street, to provide that safe accommodation. Next slide. So just kind of showing you this sort of summary of what has been looked at. We have, and we'll go through each individual one separately, is that we have examined a multitude of different alternatives. Go to the next slide. So just for ease of kind of trying to bucket these in a way, because there is so many of them, to help them understand. Sort of the first set of alternatives are putting dedicated bicycle facilities on Ellsworth itself, this continuous corridor that kind of is there. So what happens if we actually carve out some space in the street on that corridor for bicycles? And so we'll talk about some different alternatives and the trade-offs, because everything involves trade-offs, what that means if we pursue that alternative. Next one. The second sort of bucket, if you go to the next slide, Ricardo, is to look at ways that we can reduce traffic speeds and traffic volumes on Ellsworth so that we can make it a less stressful, less dangerous, fewer opportunities for conflict corridor for pedestrians and people on bicycles to travel on this corridor. So really dialing down the speeds and volumes that are on that main corridor to tame the traffic a bit there. And then the third bucket is basically go to the next slide, the grouping of alternatives that would provide that accommodation, not on Ellsworth itself, but on some of the network of streets that run roughly parallel to Ellsworth, and we'll look at that. I also want to, before we jump into these alternatives, and especially when we get into the conversations, I want to emphasize again, back to the complete streets policy, that while we're talking a lot about providing opportunities for people traveling by bicycle, because there's not obvious facilities for them in this area, what we really want when we're bringing investments to an area in the city like this is we want to be able to provide improvements for all travelers. So think about, as we talk about these alternatives, what are the pain points for pedestrians? What can we do to improve pedestrian travel here? If you happen to be a person with a disability or travel with a person with a disability, what are those areas of constraint that also need to be addressed as we're bringing this investment? If you're a transit rider, what can we do? So while we're really talking about kind of filling this missing gap of really no obvious safe place for more novice people on bicycles or less confident people on bicycles to travel in this area, what are the other ways that we can improve this quadrant of the city? Go ahead to the first alternative. So the first alternative is bike lanes right on Ellsworth. So that would extend all the way from Shady Avenue in the east, connecting to Neville Street in the west. And so having a continuous link of dedicated bicycle facilities on Ellsworth now, in place of the sharrows, which are really just directional or informational markings. They don't really provide any kind of protection or safe facility at all right now. And so to do that, go to the next slide. Achieving that on Ellsworth, is tricky. Ellsworth carries 6,000 to 7,000 vehicles a day. That's a fairly substantial volume, not overwhelming, but not negligible by any means either. Ellsworth is a fairly narrow street. At its widest in the segment from Neville to Aiken, it's 56 feet wide. And in that segment, it has one travel lane in each direction and parking on either side of it. As you get into the business district, the Aiken to Spar segment, it's only 50 feet wide, all inclusive, sidewalks, everything, and has one travel lane in each direction and just one side of parking in that area. And so if we're to take this relatively narrow cross section of the street and provide bike facilities in it, go to the next slide, please. It would require, so this is the segment that's from Neville to Aiken, where we currently have parking on both sides of the street and shared. We have bicyclists sharing fairly heavily traveled travel lanes in the middle of the street together. In order to put bike lanes there, we would need to remove the parking on Aiken, on Ellsworth. And then be able to provide that dedicated space for people on bicycles to travel. So the cross section then would be only bicycles by the curb and travel lanes in the middle. It would require then many trade-offs and a lot of problem solving that would need to happen. We would need to make certain modifications to ensure the transit, that the bus boardings can still occur. And so we sort out any conflicts that might be created from the bike lanes at the bus stops. And we would need to figure out loading, especially for the commercial district, how we would accommodate loading for those businesses in particular, as well as customer patronage and other kinds of access there. So again, each one of these alternatives you'll see involves a series of trade-offs that need to be navigated. And we'll talk about the pluses and minuses of each one as we get to the end. Go to the next alternative. So alternative 2, again, is providing bike lanes on Ellsworth itself, but preserving some degree of parking. At least in some segments of Ellsworth, and that can be achieved by eliminating a travel lane. Instead of eliminating the parking, eliminating one of the travel lanes, and changing Ellsworth to a one-way street. It's not it's not been determined or even proposed which direction of travel the one-way would go in. Go ahead to the next slide. In the narrowest, so this is just an image of how that might be achieved geometrically with different construction alternatives there. Lots of issues to talk about there. One-way travel, how do we accommodate loading in the other direction? How do we deal with the alternate direction of transit? How do we deal with fire and EMS? Go to the next slide, please. And in the narrowest segment, so from Neville to Aiken, that would, from Neville to Aiken, it would retain parking on one side of the street to create these bike lanes, but from Aiken to Spar, it would still require the elimination. So you'd have one lane of travel and the elimination of parking. This is one of the alternatives that we don't believe to be a very viable alternative. Again, there may be pieces of it as we get to the end of this that you can pluck and draw different segments of it. Overall, this one would be a difficult one to implement. Go to the next alternative, please. That's just the other segment. Go ahead. So alternative 3 would be turning Ellsworth into a type of neighborway. So what is a neighborway? A neighborway is a lower volume, lower speed street that still carries all kinds of different vehicles on it. So would still carry private motor vehicles and delivery vehicles and transit vehicles, but would travel at a much lower speed and would have substantially reduced volumes. So as we mentioned, Ellsworth has 6,000 to 7,000 vehicles a day. For a neighborway to work on Ellsworth, we would need to roughly have that volume of vehicles. So we would need to bring that down from 6,000 to 7,000 vehicles to something more to 3,000 to 3,500 vehicles a day. Which is not insurmountable. So your typical city street can quite comfortably carry even up to 10,000 vehicles. It's just not very good to have that be a shared street together with more vulnerable road users like people on bicycles. So how we would achieve that reduction in travel is to implement what we would call diverters. So these are physical features in the street that would force private motor vehicles to divert off of the street onto some of the available parallel streets, whether it's Center and Baum or Walnut Street or wherever it may be, to finish that segment of their journey. And so we could implement these if you go to the next slide. It's not known exactly where these would be, but there's multiple cross streets, Aiken and others that would, so this is a physical illustration of what a diverter might be like. It lays across an intersection of the street and forces all traffic generally to the right. So you would need to come from any approach to a diverter would take you to the right there to the next street. However, we would look to design these diverters in a way that buses would be able to proceed straight through. Delivery vehicles, for example, maybe those that would be able to proceed straight through. People on bicycles would be able to proceed straight through. So private vehicles would be diverted to use the alternate routes. Generally, local traffic would very quickly learn how to access the segment of Ellsworth that they're most interested in by coming off of those side streets and getting to their destination quite swiftly. A little bit of a learning curve in the beginning, but people quickly learn how to take their routes to get to their destinations here. But overall, this would reduce the volume of through traffic that's going on Ellsworth, oftentimes with neither origin nor destination on Ellsworth anyway. So we would keep them on other parallel corridors until they get close to their destination and then would finish sort of that last few blocks on Ellsworth itself. Go ahead to the next slide. Alternative 4 is similar to alternative 3, where you would still dramatically reduce the volume of vehicles and speeds on Ellsworth through the use of these diverters. But rather than just having bicycles share a general purpose lane, I should say that with the diverter option, there would be no changes, in general, no changes to parking or loading on the street. It's just that last mile, that last block route of access would be altered. But once you arrived at Ellsworth, alternative 3, there would be really no significant observable change in Ellsworth itself. Bicycles would share the general purpose lanes with the dramatically reduced volume of motor vehicles that are on it. Alternative 4, similar to that, but we would create what we would call advisory bicycle lanes. So these are, if you go to the next image, again, using the diverters to reduce the volume. Advisory bike lanes have sort of suggestions of bike lanes. This is not a common tool that's used in a lot of places, but is one. Grand Rapids, Michigan, for example, uses quite a few advisory bike lanes. So you would dash out the bike lane. Motor vehicles would generally move toward the center line of the street. So they would be traveling somewhat in opposing directions. When they encountered a second vehicle, then the vehicles would move over closer to the parked cars and into the advisory bike lanes to move around one another. And then they would move back toward the center. This is the way, whether you know it or not, how most of our residential streets operate, where we have no center lines marked. Most motor vehicles, as you know, will drive in the center of the lane. If there's another vehicle that approaches them in the opposite direction, they sort of navigate around that obstacle. The only difference is that we'd be kind of reserving that edge area as the preferred and obvious area for bicyclists to travel. But again, it would generally not alter parking and loading in most places of the street. Go to the next alternative. So now we start talking about those alternatives that are not on Ellsworth at all. So, you know, we are fortunate in some respects in this area of the city to have some alternate routes. There's not any immediately parallel routes to Ellsworth, however. So it does require sort of a combination of different streets to make that connection work. So alternative 5 would use Walnut and Spar and kind of join into Elmer Street, drop down on Aiken to pick up Pembroke, move again over to use Baird, and then travel on Neville before you can pick up other bicycle facilities again. For these neighborway alternatives to work, we would need to really improve the crossings. So again, this would be not only for bicyclists, but for pedestrians as well, because we're talking about those more vulnerable. So these are not the confident or the very confident. These are not the somewhat confident or confident bicyclists. These are the interested but concerned. They're the more vulnerable people on bikes that we're looking to provide that critical connection for, to make sure that they are safe. So your high schoolers going to their destinations, your older adults going to the library or retail destinations or wherever they might be going. Making sure that those crossings are safe for them would require different crossing treatments at multiple different intersections. It would also require changes to Aiken and Neville themselves in order to make these vertical connections. We would need to then, even with the neighborway alternatives, have some parking removal in order to create that safe bicycle space for them to travel on these linking streets. So alternative 6, I think, if you go ahead. So this is alternative 5, uses this set of streets. If you flip one more, alternative 6, similar concept, but uses Howe and Kentucky as sort of one-way pairs to permit that movement to happen. Again, would need to still use Pembroke and Baird to do that, and that would require, again, those alterations to Aiken and Neville in order to provide those connections, because we don't have a single continuous street that parallels the whole length of Ellsworth through the neighborhood. So we do have to do these kind of jockeying moves. Again, looking at intersection treatments to make sure that those intersections are safe and protected for the more vulnerable pedestrians and people on bicycles, families, whatnot, that might be traveling on these corridors. So go another slide. I've seen out of the corner of my eye lots of chat. So now we're going to try and get to some of that. I have not been able to follow any of it other than seeing it tick by in the corner of my eye. So again, 6 defined alternatives that we sort of went through. So the first 2 alternatives, were different modifications of Ellsworth itself to put those bike facilities on Ellsworth. Again, that was, just to recap, elimination of parking was alternative 1 to provide lanes. Conversion to a one-way street was alternative 2 to create those bike lanes on Ellsworth itself. Alternatives 3 and 4 involved utilizing diverters and reducing the volume and speed. So a combination of diverters and traffic calming to kind of tone down the vehicular kind of stress that's on Ellsworth Avenue, but still keeping the bikes on that continuous corridor in a slower, safer, less conflicting, lower stress way. And then alternatives 5 and 6 using the different sets of alternative neighborhood streets, which would be combined with traffic calming, other kinds of improvements that really address sort of the livability of those residential streets to slow vehicles down, deter, cut through traffic, improve the crossings, and lower stress on those parallel streets. And then alternative 7, which we definitely want to hear from you about, which is, can we cobble together concepts from one or more of these alternatives to piece together something that might work? Is it a neighbor way using Spar and Elmer that then kind of comes up and uses the a lower traffic diverter option on Ellsworth? Is it something else that might work to combine these things? So I'm going to stop there. Ricardo, keep the map up so we can have a conversation if you go back one.
Sounds good. Thanks for that. Just a quick reminder.
Can you go back to the map though, so we have it? What I wanted to ask you was if you could facilitate some of the discussion and for a minute so I can look through some of the comments and see if we...
Yeah, I think there's a delay on the slide. So do you see the map now?
Yeah, I see the map now.
Okay, good. Sorry about that. Would you like me to go ahead and start looking at the questions and raise hands? So well, thanks for that. So before that, just a quick reminder that this meeting is being recorded. It's going to be put on the website. Also, the presentation slides will be available for you. And I see we have raised hands, and I know we have questions in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and call 2 names from the raised hands and then do 2 questions from the chat. I believe we had Sean who raised his hand first. So Sean, please unmute yourself.
Hey there, my name's Sean. I live on Lehigh in Shadyside. I'd just like to say I really like the idea of bike lanes on Ellsworth. Something I just found interesting, I like that concept, and I also like the idea of having neighborways, but using them combined, kind of, because it really seems like if we just go with a neighborway, a lot of people are still going to commute on Ellsworth, because at the end of the day, that's the most direct way to get anywhere. So it seems like it would just kind of make people mad if you're not actually biking on the neighborways, but instead having the option to do either one. Like if you're in a hurry, you can hop on Ellsworth and get where you need to go, or you can use the neighborways and kind of take a more leisurely route to get where you're going. So I like both of them, but at the end of the day, bike lanes on Ellsworth seems like a must-have almost.
Thank you so much for that. I appreciate your coming. All right, we have Paige. Paige, please unmute yourself.
Thank you. I live in Regent Square in the city of Pittsburgh. So I live in the city and I worship at Church of the Ascension on the corner of Ellsworth and Neville. And I just wanted to say that I really care deeply about bike safety. My husband bikes a lot and he's actually been seriously injured. It was probably a car that was driving dangerously, but he doesn't remember what happened. So we don't know for sure. So I really do know the fear of cars moving too quickly and not respecting bicyclists. I just wanted to speak up and say that on-street parking preserves the fabric of our community. On-street parking preserves the character of Shadyside. Without on-street parking, you need large surface lots, and large surface lots will kill the neighborhood really quickly. If you've ever been to Columbus, Ohio, it's a city with ample surface parking and no fabric and no continuity and no community feeling in its streets. So I don't think we want that. I think we all want Shadyside to be the vibrant neighborhood that it is. And I just wanted to put those concerns on the table. And I will say too that our church uses all the surface parking that we can. We have friendly agreements with our neighbors, for instance, at Oakland Catholic. So we do park off street whenever we can, and dozens of families do that. But you know, there's conventional wisdom that a church can't grow bigger than its parking lot. And we have done that. We have more people attend than could park in a parking lot because we integrate into the fabric of the neighborhood by parking on the streets in the existing street parking. So those are my concerns, and thank you very much for your careful planning.
Yeah, thank you so much for your comments. I don't know if anybody from the team wanted to add anything to that. If not, I'll pass the mic to Eric, who has some questions from the chat.
Yeah, hi. So the first question that appeared was from Christine, who asked, has there been any discussion regarding redesigning the sidewalks to accommodate bikes for the stretch? I guess that's to Domi.
Yeah, the short answer is really no. It's still, unfortunately, you know, the sort of laws of geometry still, excuse me, still prevail here. We only have 56 feet from building face to building face in the larger, wider, more residential area. Wider, I say in air quotes. And we only have 50 feet from building face to building face in the business portion. So that includes the sidewalks. So if we were to widen the sidewalks, that space would still need to come from somewhere of how the street is divided right now. Secondly, it is not preferred to have people on bicycles traveling, commingling with pedestrians and retail and other kinds of things. They do travel at a higher rate of speed, and they do have a somewhat greater mass associated with them. And so we really prefer to separate them where we can. Trails, obviously a little bit different, but you're expecting, I think, some of that commingling on trails. But in our commercial districts and in our residential districts, in commercial districts, it's not allowed by code. In residential districts, we prefer to separate them, although we do know that in particular, those more vulnerable, less confident cyclists do go on the sidewalks in the residential areas, and that creates some conflicts of its own. But it has been contemplated. I won't say we built an alternative around it, simply because the geometry still holds, and it would still require the same trade-offs that we discussed in these alternatives.
I'll go ahead and ask another one. There were a lot of comments and questions about other alternatives. So I'll kind of summarize them all into one with Fifth Avenue is more dangerous to cyclists than Ellsworth. So I prefer to use Ellsworth when commuting. Is there anything being done about Fifth, or has that been considered? There were several questions about that, so covering them all in one.
Maybe let us solve one and then the other. Yeah, Fifth and Penn are both definitely pretty tricky bike corridors. The short answer is no. We haven't through this area been able to really, you know, at this time, Ellsworth has been the focus in this area because it is, while still having safety concerns of its own, it is generally safer at this time for those more vulnerable street users than Penn or Fifth Center.
All right, I'm gonna go back and jump to a couple more questions from the people that raised their hands. We have Christine, Christine, please unmute yourself.
Sure, thanks, Ricardo. Karina, thanks so much for your presentation. It's great. I appreciate seeing all the detail in the sections. Have been really helpful to understanding the alternatives. I wanted to, I guess, I know you haven't decided on the diverters, so I have a couple of comments and maybe one additional question. I would just add, I just put this in the chat, but if you divert at Morewood, and if I'm understanding the diverter concept correctly, you'll be diverting car traffic there possibly too. And I'm sure you're aware, but the Winchester Thurston School is there, and there's a lot of activity, you know, with kids crossing the street to use the garden and play space across the street, and you know, people coming and going to pick up and drop off and after school activities and so forth. So I would you know, I just feel strongly that not be a diverter if that's the case, or at least that it's, you know, vetted with the parent population and they have a chance to weigh in as a community, a mini community on that street. And then the other, I guess, question I have is regarding, I came into the presentation a little bit late, and is there an option on the table for this to be a truly neighborhood street where access is really just for people who live there, who are, you know, using the schools, the churches, and the rest of the traffic is sort of encouraged to use other roads? It seems like a, you know, potentially really special opportunity to do that at this juncture. I just wondered if you could comment on that.
Sure. So to the first point, the diverters as a concept are being floated sort of for discussion and sort of explanation of what that tool is and how it might work. There has been no design or contemplation of exactly where those diverters would go. So, you know, the considerations of the other institutions that are along the corridor and the other, you know, how that might impact different places is definitely something that is still to happen. If this is an alternative that seems like it's got some legs and might be, might be a happy medium as a way to get us where we want to go. So we hear you on the Winston Thurston concerns and needing to make sure that that's vetted with that community. Absolutely, we're not there yet. Making it a local street is what the neighbor way concept is really that intent to try and make it that place where that, as I said, that last block, that last, not quite last mile, but that last little segment where you have either an origin or a destination or both, but hopefully if it's both, you would consider biking or walking if you can, or taking the bus, this short segment. But the problem is that we can't, people won't follow that. We can't just say it without, we need to have these other physical interventions to kind of reinforce that role. There's no way for us to differentiate a vehicle that is a local vehicle or that has business, you know, to do on the corridor as being local. There's just no way that we can do that sort in any kind of a reasonable way. We can put signage up, but we know people just generally ignore signage. So really we'd be looking at those physical alternatives. Does anyone on the team want to provide any other kind of comment to that? But that is the intent of the neighborhood, is to get at exactly that goal or exactly that kind of image that you were conveying. It's just that we use the geometric, kind of the soft modifications to help reinforce that behavior.
Thanks. Yeah.
Thank you for that question. I'm going to ask one other person that raised their hand. We have Andrew. Please unmute yourself.
Hello, I'm Andrew. I'm a homeowner on Alder Street and I do not own a car. So I routinely bike on Ellsworth, and I think the most important thing that we can get out of this is some kind of physical protection for bicyclists, because most of the time it's totally fine. And then someone abuses the current design of the street, and suddenly I'm at risk, other drivers are at risk. I'm routinely passed by someone going fast enough so that the other drivers coming the other way have to slam on their brakes. This kind of thing happens a lot. I will say that I'm most intrigued by the alternative 3, the neighbor way, or if that was alternative 3, with the diverters in particular. I've lived in other cities that have had this kind of structure of really optimizing streets for a neighborhood feel, and it's been a really great experience. I think that Shadyside would really benefit from that. And I would also like to support those in the chat who are saying, we shouldn't exclude the other neighborway options from this as well. It would be great for Shadyside to have that in addition to improvements on Castleman, Pembroke, and Howe in Kentucky, for example. That would provide a really valuable addition to the neighborhood. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I'm going to pass it to Eric again to see questions from the chat.
Yeah, I'm going to combine a couple because they're all about diverters. So first is, would the reduction of traffic on Ellsworth by half be achieved by diverting traffic or discourage local traffic? And then kind of combine with that is, if diverters are used, how will it affect buses as well as plowing?
Eric, I was looking at the comments. Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry, I was trying to
Yeah,
catch up on some of these.
The question was generally about the diversion and how you plan to reduce the traffic by half, assuming it's with diverters. And if so, how will diverters affect buses that run on Ellsworth as well as plowing on Ellsworth?
Yeah, the buses are a really big, it's a key concern. Having the buses maintain operations on Ellsworth is part of the way that we can manage the overall traffic volumes on Ellsworth and still keep patronage to the businesses and convenience to the institutions and all of the other things that are there. So the diverters would be essentially mountable. There's a couple of different approaches. We haven't, again, this is yet to be engineered, so we're just talking about concepts now. One is to treat it with kind of gating elements, not literally gates, but things like pedestrian refuge islands, like what you might see. Trying to think of a good example, not like the ones on South Dallas, but actual concrete crossing islands, just ways to narrow the appearance of the street at those points where we're trying to encourage the diversion. And then we would have signage that says, buses only. That would be able to proceed through at that point. All other traffic, must turn left or right. That's one approach that we could do that relies strongly on people reading the signs and following them, and or backing it up with enforcement, which we of course don't have photo enforcement, so that is a little bit more labor intensive to back those kinds of diverters up with enforcement. The other way that we can introduce the diverters is through mountable diverters. So they would be physical elements, not, perhaps somewhat similar to a speed hump, but a little bit more intimidating than a speed hump, that would have wheel tracks through them that would allow the buses to go through. And the gauge of a bus, the width of the bus wheels is actually wider than it is for a passenger vehicle. So we can gauge those wheel tracks to, which would be the same ones that the bicyclists would use to go through the physical diverters. The buses could still go through. Plows would either follow the same diverter route that motor vehicles do, and just that short segment would need to be hand shoveled by our crews or whomever to have the buses go through and the bikes, or we would design those diverters in a way like the speed humps that the plows would just go over them as well. So maintenance would need to be designed and accommodated in coordination with our partners at DPW who do the snow clearance. But that is definitely sort of that next level of design where we actually do have, I should also say, as we go to any of these designs, we do loop in our various other department partners, the police and EMS and DPW to review city planning, to review that next level of engineering design. But there are a few different alternatives to try and create those diverters, different means that we could do that. We would review those specifics with Port Authority, DPW, and others to make sure it works.
Sounds good. I'm gonna jump back to raise hands. I'm gonna call John and then Susan. John, please unmute yourself.
Yeah, thanks. I'm a regular cyclist. I'm an experienced cyclist, and I also am a member of Friends Meeting House. So I sort of have both perspectives here. So there's a couple of things I'd like to point out. One is that character of Ellsworth changes significantly in Negley. East of there, you have the business area, sort of it gets narrower. And as a cyclist, I rarely have problems there. I mean, it's much more comfortable riding. Of course, I'm experienced, but it's really west of there that where the street widens, and you get drivers that are really thinking this is a highway. So they'll pass people, they'll drive aggressively. If you're taking the lane, it can be very frightening. So I suggest some sort of hybrid approach where you do something like alternative 3 or 4, maybe west of Negley and on east of Negley, depend on other routes, or maybe make the street a little quieter. Basically, try to maybe have that a little backwards. I'm saying trying to get traffic off of Negley, bike traffic off of Ellsworth, west of Negley and east of Negley, depend on calming measures. Also, as a member of Friends Meeting, we actually have a parking lot, and I think it still has that kind of neighborly neighborhood kind of feeling. I mean, it's not, you don't have to have huge surface lots to provide some parking for the members of your meeting. I understand the need for parking presently, our meeting definitely uses on-street parking, needs on-street parking. We have members who are elderly and can't walk that far, so it's definitely important. But also, I feel it's just as a responsible sort of institution, providing parking for your members is a good thing. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much for that comment. I'm going to call Susan. Please unmute yourself.
Yes, I also am appreciative of your presentation. It's really been excellent. And I certainly understand the need for a bike path and why Ellsworth would be the path of choice. I'm a little concerned because I am a member of Church of the Ascension. We have 500 plus people who attend church on a Sunday, let alone the AA meetings and all the other activities that take place. And while we do have alternative parking venues, those are not always available other than on weekends. And there is nowhere for us to build a parking lot where we could accommodate more people. So I'm wondering, is there an alternative whereby there could be a portion of the streets that are one way with a two-way bike path on the other side, one way with the parking and the cars going one way, and then the bikes on the other side of the street going two ways? That's just a question that I have.
Thanks for your question.
Thank you, Susan. So I assume your question is meaning on Ellsworth. Is that an option, or do you mean on the?
I mean, on Ellsworth, particularly, where Church of the Ascension is, we are desperate for parking because of the number of people that attend, not only parishioners, but also alternative groups that that use our facility.
We haven't looked at that. I'm going to see if any of my other team members want to pipe up. In general, the challenge with a any one-way solution with Ellsworth is that one-ways usually have to be paired with another street that goes in the other direction. So that, I always call it the Hotel California, you have to be able to leave again once you arrive someplace. And that's, we have not deeply explored the one-way option for Ellsworth because we lack that paired alternate one-way to bring people home again. So I think that's the short answer to it. It's not saying that that couldn't be explored, but it doesn't appear to be a viable alternative to look at.
I'm just speaking about a portion,
right?
Just a small portion, not the entire Ellsworth.
No, yeah, I understand. It's just even for that small portion, we'd have to figure out in that segment because we would have to then. You'd really have to reroute. So if the other two segments, let's say the bookended pieces of Ellsworth were two-way, we would still need to find an efficient way to drop traffic down to the pair to that segment and then back up.
Which could be Bayard.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That could be something we can look at. Can I? Ricardo, just in the interest of time and to try and capture some more, as people make their comments, if you can maybe kind of highlight, what maybe like really important considerations that we need to maintain here, and maybe some places where you would be willing to compromise, if that makes sense in terms of your comments. So I've heard, for example, a few different places, the importance of maintaining on-street parking. So that being kind of a major key. Obviously, we've also heard safe bicycling facilities where you're not threatened by vehicles coming alongside you or driving too aggressively. I think those are some of the things that have highlighted to me in the comments that have been made. So just in the, so that we're sure to kind of capture those very overtly, if folks wanted to offer those of like, this is a key concern, but here's the flip side of that coin of where I might be willing to, give a little bit.
Totally. Yeah, no, that's great. I'm gonna continue with the raised hands. I'm gonna call Fred and then Robert. Fred, please.
Hi, this is Fred Collin. I live right on the corner of Ellsworth and Morwood Avenues, and I appreciate all the work and effort that's been done by the committees, but I haven't seen any data that suggests that the property owners, the homeowners on Ellsworth in the immediate area have had any input, significant or insignificant, as to any changes that may be made to the Ellsworth bike lanes. Ellsworth right now, as we all know, is a large bike lane for the bikes, and it seemed to me that's working okay. But I just raised the question. I think that the residents have to have some significant input into this. And my only second question is that, is there an alternative 8 that the status quo in Ellsworth should remain? And I see lots of other hands up. I'm following your guidance and just raising the key points in my mind. But I think that there has to be some input from the residents of Ellsworth that live here that could be affected by any changes that will be something other than that will modify the status quo. So I'm not expecting any answers. I just want to put out my comments and concerns. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Cohen. Definitely, we want the input. That's one of the reasons why we have the advisory committee and have this meeting, and hope to continue to receive that. There is not, to answer the second question, there is not sort of a no build or status quo because it does not, it really doesn't satisfy that principal challenge, which is somewhere in this multitude of streets that we have in this area of the city, we must accommodate for the safe travel of people who must or choose to travel. And the safety statistics bear out that this is something that's somewhere in this network of streets we need to solve for. So status quo, unfortunately, is just not adequate to remain. But we do want that input, and we do want to find hopefully that place where we can give and take enough that we can solve this very difficult challenge. If it was easy, it would have been done by now. It's not easy, and we appreciate all of you really being collaborative with us and trying to solve it.
Thank you for that. Just a quick reminder for everybody. I see still a lot of raised hands and questions from the chat. A couple of reminders that this meeting is being recorded. You'll be able to watch it after this meeting. The slides will also be available on our website. And if for some reason we can't answer your question, this will be added to a FAQ. And now I'm gonna call Robert and then Ali. Robert, please unmute yourself.
Thank you very much. First, I would like to echo Fred's comments about the engagement of the property owners and residents along Ellsworth. To my knowledge, most of them have not been contacted regarding this. So I still think that is a necessary component of these discussions. The second thing I would ask, and I've asked this several times, is are there any traffic studies or counts showing the bike and vehicular traffic along this corridor?
Yes, we have counts.
Okay. Is it possible that those can be available to the public?
Sure, we can post those. I will say as a caveat, and it's not an excuse, it's a fact. The bike counts are not necessarily indicative, because as we've seen that when streets are intimidating and when streets are difficult to navigate, there is an unnatural suppression of the users that you might have should we be able to provide a safe connection. So we'll make that data available. There are counts and we'll make it, but you do need to kind of take it with that grain of salt that there is that 53% of interested but concerned that would not be reflected in those counts because of the current environment of the streets.
Yeah, I don't know where that 53% number comes from, but I do think the count is relevant to consider the magnitude of the changes we're suggesting to this community, so we can evaluate what the current usage for bike travel is. So how would those be made available, just so I know? Because I've asked.
We can post them on the website, Ricardo. Yes.
Okay.
We have a place.
And just for clarity, is it a traffic study or is it just counts?
They are counts. A traffic study is largely based on counts and projections.
No, I understand that, but who did the counts?
We do the counts.
Who's we?
The Department of Mobility and Infrastructure has digital data counters that we use to collect a multimodal count, so it can capture all modes of, well, it captures vehicles, bicycles, and pedestrians.
Okay, so it would show where these counters were and when they were placed there?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that would be great.
And we do, I believe, Paige, if you want to jump in, or somebody else, I believe that we have counts pre-COVID, which is obviously, we're sort of in a weird moment. But let me confirm the which counts that we have.
I believe there is pre-COVID data, and also staff went to do in-person count during COVID times as well.
We also utilize data sets like streetlight data that we're able to understand what type of modes and numbers and time of day. And we have access to other programs that are not always representative of all users, such as Strava, which counts bicycles and only some bicycles, but we use every option that's available to us and we combine them to get the most complete picture possible.
Okay, but it'll be reflective in whatever you're going to post as to where you're drawing those numbers from?
Yes, we'll post the data. The data that we'll post are the counts that we did. So,
okay, that would be great. I appreciate that.
Sure.
Yeah,
thank you.
Totally. And I'm going to send everybody that signed up for the meeting, even if they are not here, I'm going to send any information regarding the meeting. not only a link to the video, the presentation, but also the website where you'll be able to see this once it's updated. I'm gonna call people that raise their hands. So I'm gonna call Ali and then Gary. So Ali, please unmute yourself.
Hey, Ricardo, thank you very much. You and Karina and Erica really have done a wonderful job putting all this together. I think it seems to me that I don't want to say the most viable option, but looks like it's an alternative 3 or 4 will be what I will be, supporting for sure. It seems that it's a straight shot. I feel that, and I don't know if there is a data on this. I cycle, but to me, it's turning left or turning right is where sometimes I feel unsafe. So that will make me think that if for example, if we do an alternative 7 hybrid, etc., turning from Pembroke on Aiken left or right, to me, it's quite a dangerous. It's a dangerous proposal. I feel. I think I don't know what are the proposed. The proposal on alternative 3 or 4, but I think if we come up with a plan that, number 1, maintain the parking on both sides, and number 2, calm Ellsworth. I mean, instead of driving 35 miles an hour or 40 miles an hour, drive slower, and then having the the shared traffic with the cyclists. I feel that may be the most viable option here, and I certainly will support that. But then again, I really appreciate all the work you've done so far on this, and we will certainly be supportive to the plan. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. We really appreciate your comments. I don't know if the team had anything to add, but if not, I'll just call the next person. Gary, please.
Hi, thank you. I live on Elmer Street and am a cyclist, and also own 2 businesses on Ellsworth Avenue. And I know a lot of folks have spoken up in regards to the parking on Ellsworth. And I do know that about 80% of our customers will drive to our businesses. And if we lose our parking spaces, our businesses would be in seriously bad shape. So I think less parking is really not a viable option. We really need more parking throughout the area, and we know that that's just not going to happen either. Someone had brought up the point of making left turns and right turns on some of these alternate routes for the cycling as being dangerous, and I agree. I like Ellsworth Avenue for bike riding because it's a straight shot and there are very few stop signs. The stop signs can be a danger in that, as all the other cyclists know, we don't stop at stop signs, and we don't really need to, because we're going so slow that we can slow down and go through that intersection at a slow rate of speed safely. But if you combine that with the vehicles going through the stop signs and not stopping either, that becomes a very dangerous situation. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We appreciate your comments. Just want to remind everybody real quick that if you know people that, couldn't come to the meeting, reminding about it being recorded, about the slides that will be posted on the website. We also have a survey, and I believe Eric is going to be posting that link on the chat. And I also will be sharing that with everybody that registered after the meeting. So I'm just going to call Mary and then Rick. So Mary, please unmute yourself.
Hi. So I just wanted to voice my support for alternatives 1 or 2. In late October, I volunteered to be a counter on Ellsworth and Morewood, and I was there for 2 hours, and I counted 106 bicyclists going on Ellsworth, which is an insane number of bicyclists, way more than I had expected to count. I mean, and a couple of them were children biking, like grade school children biking from school. There were Uber Eats delivery guys biking on it. It's just like such a crucial road that is a main connector. And like looking at these other alternatives, all I see is 2 million intersections. You know, I think like a loose count, if I were to try to drive from Morewood to the other end, it's 30 some intersections that as a cyclist, you would have to be stopping and looking at each way. And that's my main problem with other neighborways in Pittsburgh, is just the amount of stopping makes you just want to go to Ellsworth. So my biggest concern is that not doing anything to Ellsworth and just focusing on these neighborways isn't going to really solve all the accidents that occur on Ellsworth. And as a last thing I'd like to mention is that I would visit and shop in Shadyside more often if I could just bike there safely. I think a lot of people that I know would do that too. But thanks for putting this on.
I think I'm the Mary who is actually next in the queue.
Yes, thank you, Mary, and
Too
thanks,
many
Mary.
Marys and they all look alike, I get it. So thanks for this presentation, for the thoughtful analysis, and to everyone here for a constructive and civilized discussion. I'd like to raise a point that has not been made yet, and that's about the integration of this in the overall city network, which was one of the overarching objectives. A great deal of the traffic from Shadyside goes back and forth to CMU in Oakland. The connection over Baird to the bike lanes on Baird will help people who are going to Pitt. But there's a gap in the diagram that we're looking at here that doesn't bridge to CMU. The natural entrance to CMU would be at Morewood and Fifth, which is an intersection that's designed or intended for improvement under some other program entirely. But as you think about this network, think about a way to get a connection into the CMU campus, which will take you through the CMU campus and over to the Forbes Avenue bike lanes as well. So it's not just CMU people involved. From the map that's sitting here, protected bike lanes on Morewood would be the natural. But I'd like to make sure that connection is part of the outcome of this meeting.
Thank you so much for that comment. I don't know if we have any input from the staff, but if not, I'll keep going. And just another quick reminder, I know it's almost 7:30 and we really want to be respectful with everybody's time. I think maybe we can call a couple more people from the raise hands, and if for some reason we can answer your question, please add it into the chat and we'll add that to an FAQ. So right now I'm just gonna call Rick and then Rob. So Rick, please unmute yourself.
I think there was a couple of Ricks, but apparently I was fastest on the trigger. Was I the one that you meant?
Yes.
Okay. The previous commenter about the number of stop signs on the alternative plans, I wanted to echo that. I thought it was a great point. And I also want to add that is not only hard on all cyclists, but especially on hesitant or new cyclists who would be the least able to deal with the constant physical demand of starting and stopping. And therefore I support bike lanes on Ellsworth.
Thank you so much for that. And again, just reminding everybody, because it seems like we have a lot of hands raised and maybe we won't have enough time to answer them all. So please also add your question to the chat, or, I believe Eric also shared the link to the survey and the website. So I'll be also able to ask questions via that. Rick, please unmute yourself. Oh, did I already? Oh, Rob.
Yes, hi, thank you. And again, as I just want to echo what other people said. I really appreciate the process and the opportunity to see the plans and to provide feedback and ask questions. So I attend the First Unitarian Church, And I know it's been expressed by, you know, a number of the churches where there's obviously it's a huge concern for us, you know, eliminating parking on Ellsworth. We have a lot of elderly folks, people with mobility issues. So where they would park and to get to church is a challenge. And it's not just Sunday mornings. I think as was expressed, there's a lot of events that we have during the week. So we're definitely a key part of the community, I think all these churches. And so I do have a question, because all three churches, First Unitarian, Church of the Ascension, and the Friends Meeting House are all located basically between Moorwood and Craig Street and or Neville Street. And the question I had was there an alternative ever explored? And again, this doesn't help with folks on the rest of Ellsworth, of heading up Amberson and then over to Bayard, because that would ensure that Bayard already has bike lanes, and that way none of the churches would be impacted, and the parking there, and that would just be a simple change to what is laid out here. So that was just a question, if that had ever been explored, going up Amberson and then over to Bayard.
Thank you. Thank you for
Can
that
I
question.
pitch that to the team really quick, Paige or Kim? And if we don't know, because we don't have our full team here, we try and kind of, you know, share across meetings. Amberson to Bayard, was that explored?
Hey there, this is Paige. We did look at Amberson with some of these neighborway options, but when we're looking at the trail connections and the connections to, you know, Pitt, it seemed important to a lot of the stakeholder groups that it connect to Neville and the trails and universities down there. But we did discuss a lot with Bayard as an alternative to some of those areas.
Yeah, it would only be a block more. That's all I'm, you know, it wouldn't be changing. It would basically be Bayard to Neville.
Okay, we can do a little more thinking on that.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Ricardo, I just want to, we do have a couple more slides to get through, and I know you probably see all of the hands. I don't. Well, if you go back to the map slide, quickly, what I have heard, and feel free in these last moments as we close, I have not heard a whole lot of advocacy for alternatives 5 and 6 as a general overarching love them concept. I have heard the attraction of Ellsworth as a corridor for bicyclists, the concern about parking loss on Ellsworth as we get toward the western end, maybe some of these other, taking a little bit of a deeper dive into some of these other alternatives like Amberson and Bayard, and some of those things as we get toward the western end of it. So we do want to move this, you know, process a little bit toward, you know, more refinement so that we can look at those things. So if there's, so I think there's still some more work to be done on probably what would end up being a hybrid solution ultimately. None of them really, you know, nor did we expect that one of them would you know, just solve everyone's concerns across the board for this. But trying to sort of, you know, refine down. I think that we've heard some of the key concerns, some of the things that we really need to problem solve around, things that we need to maintain, and maybe a couple of different things that we can look at as further refinements to this. So that's sort of what I'm gleaning, and we'll go through all of the comments again. I haven't seen, there's been a lot of chat, so I haven't seen everything that's happened in the chat, but just in the conversations and what I've been able to see, sort of gleaning with that. So we'll circle back around with the advisory group and make sure that we all kind of heard the same things. Look again at some more alternatives, and there will be more conversations with this. If we want to go, Ricardo, to the next slide. So just wanted to kind of summarize what I've been hearing so that if I heard anything, wrong, you can definitely record that in the chat. What I got just patently wrong. And really, honestly, thank all of you. I know this is a difficult connection and there's just a lot. It's a very complex network, lots of different concerns. I really applaud all of you for the fantastic turnout that we had in this, and really thank you for your just productive and thoughtful and, with an eye toward problem solving comments on this. I can't tell you how grateful I am for the dialogue that you've shared in this, and just the general respect that you've shared with each other. Really, really deeply appreciate that. Go ahead, Ricardo, to the next steps. I know that we're cutting some people off, but want to be respectful of your time. There is, this is not the only connection to this complex bike plus network that we're trying to develop in the city. Also kind of in this sphere of the city, there's also things going on the north side and the west end and whatever, but of those of interest perhaps to you all. There's another meeting next week to talk about an east-west connector through Squirrel Hill South, formerly known as the Beacon Street alternative, but through that process, we again are looking at some parallel corridors. So I think we've got some really good solutions that have kind of percolated through that community process. So grateful for that community. But if you want to tune into that next week, April 29th. And then we are really going to put our thinking caps on, sharpen our pencils, dive deep based on the comments that you gave us. And we want to come back to you on May 5th with some refinements based on those priorities that you've identified here and preferences that have been articulated, and are really hopeful that on May 5th we'll get even finer, so that we can start really narrowing that down to something that we can implement that generally works well for all of you. My caveat is that I get my second vaccine the day before, so if I'm not at the May 5th meeting, you know why, but I'll be the happiest not feeling well person that there is for that. Register for those meetings at the website here. There's in the chat, Eric and others, you can put again and again, the survey where you can put more comments from this meeting or elsewhere, the website where you can put information, people who you know, neighbors, friends who want to view this recording or give feedback. If you don't want to rewatch The Crown, you can watch this video recording instead, and leave your comments at this website. So really want to thank you. I know we could keep going for quite a while. Again, we'll answer all of those questions that are in the chat if you're able to put those in there. Ricardo, is there more? That's our last slide, I think. Yes.
Yeah, I think you really covered it all. Thanks again for reminding them about the website and the survey, and just letting everybody know that, yeah, this meeting is being recorded and will be uploaded to the website along with the presentation slides. So you have, more time to look at the different proposals. And again, sorry for the people that we couldn't call for the raise hands. Please add your question to the chat. I'm going to stay 5 more minutes in case you want to type your question, and all of those will be, answered in the future. And again, yeah, just thank you so much, everybody. I just want to thank you all for being really respectful. We really appreciate your feedback. And I want to thank not only the team, but also Jim, or interpreter for the night. So thank you so much, Jim. You do a great job. So thanks for being with us, interpreting tonight. All right, and thank you, everybody. I don't know if anybody else.
Enjoy. Go play in the snow. Just kidding.
I did have just one follow-up question to the next steps. and how you guys planned on informing the property owners and residences in the area about the next steps, because we were not informed the first time.
So I believe that posters have been posted out on the street. Ricardo,
Yeah, I've seen the posters, but it seems that they start at Morewood and you're missing the entire block with the Church of the Ascension and all those apartment buildings that go all the way up to Neville, because there was not one flyer on that block of Ellsworth.
Okay, thanks for that. We'll make sure that every block is covered so that everybody has an opportunity to see those.
Yeah, and that's a big group, especially for those elderly people going to church. And more specifically, I live in the apartment building across from the church that has over 200 units. And all of the doctors on the first floor have much older patients that would, have the same impact as the church if they were taken away.
Great, thanks for letting us know that. So Ricardo actually leads our street teams. So we'll make sure that those posters are out there. Thanks for alerting us to that.
Yeah, great feedback. Thank you. And thanks everybody again. I hope you have a great night, and hopefully we'll see you again.
Thank you very much. Have a great night, guys.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thanks very much, everyone.